one and all, to yet another edition of Escape from Walt Disney, the podcast where we review movies, TV shows, and short films available on the Disney Plus streaming service, chosen mostly completely at random. I'm your host, Tony Goldmark. Joining me once again is David GANSSLE.
You can't get rid of me that easily.
Nicholas BOGROFF GANSSLE.
What's up, guys?
And joining us for the very first time on Escape from Walt Disney, you know him on Twitter as @ThemeParker104. You know him from his web series, Theme Park Backlot, and you know him as a ride operator on Space Mountain at the Magic Kingdom in Disney World. Ladies and gentlemen, Chandler DesRochers.
Hey, everyone. Happy to be here.
And we are about to watch actually a good movie for once on this podcast. I don't know why I keep saying that. We've reviewed other good movies, just possibly not as good as this one. The classic Walt Disney Pinocchio from 1940, the second full-length animated feature that Walt Disney ever made. This was requested by a Patreon patron named Lizzy Gravelle. Hi, Lizzy. She's actually a pretty good online friend of ours. She goes by @LizzyLemondrop on Twitter, and she said in her request, "I'ma request the original Pinocchio. Y'all haven't done enough old classics."
That is true. I was thinking about this the other day about how the randomizer has disproportionately chosen recent things.
Yeah.
Granted, that's because there are so many more recent
There
things.
are, yeah.
Back then, they were making a movie every couple of years. Now they're putting out 6,000 pieces of content a month.
This is episode, I believe, 19. This is the first thing the randomizer's ever chosen for us that was made while Walt was alive. The closest we ever got before was the Aristocats on our third episode, but that was released 4 years after he died.
The second closest we got was Frank and Dolly, because that was just about the time Walt was alive.
Of course. And there'll be quite a bit of Frank and Ollie animation in this one, I do believe. Has anyone in this room not ever seen this movie?
No, I've seen it.
We've seen it, but we most likely saw it when we were kids, I'm guessing.
I've rewatched some sequences here and there in the past several years, but I can't remember the last time I watched it start to finish.
There is a very small handful of Disney animated films that I never rewatched as a teenager or an adult. This is one of them. For a while, I would have said Dumbo was one of them, but when the Dumbo remake came out and we all watched Dumbo together,
right,
that was the first time since I was a child I'd watched Dumbo. This is going to be the first time since I was a child that I've rewatched Pinocchio.
It's one of those animated films that I feel like we kind of take for granted. We know it's out there. It feels like we almost never seek it out because it is kind of omnipresent. A lot of things from it have become these crucial tenets of Walt Disney lore, like
When
the
You
song
Wish Upon a Star.
When You Wish Upon a Star, for example, or the whole concept of Pleasure Island, or your nose growing when you lie. These are things that are kind of embedded in pop culture. I've never actually read the original Italian Pinocchio book. I don't know how much of that was in the book already, or how much of it Walt Disney created.
Cue David.
I have read an English translation of the original Pinocchio book, and a lot of the sequences do come from the book. There's some different pacing, there's some rearranging, as there always is in adaptation. Some things get conflated, some things get dropped, but a lot of the details do come from the source material. Very little, to my recollection, was made up whole cloth for the movie. My biggest memory from the book is that Jiminy was not as well-defined a character. I don't think he was named in the book. I think he was just the Cricket.
The name Jiminy Cricket comes from a G-rated version of when someone would exclaim Jesus Christ. It was like saying darn instead of damn. Instead of saying Jesus Christ, you'd say Jiminy Crickets. And they use that for the name. And that's gone kind of unheralded for many years, is that one of the most recognizable Disney characters comes from the soft version of a swear, basically.
This is the thing. As a kid, I assumed it was a play on the phrase, Jiminy Crickets.
Right.
But then as an adult, I went, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Do we say Jiminy Cricket because the name is Jiminy Cricket, or is that the pun? Because it's old enough that I could see it going either way.
The only reason I knew for a fact as a kid that the expression Jiminy Cricket predated the character is because the dwarves say Jiminy Cricket in Snow White, which I knew predated this movie.
Jiminy Crickets.
Wow,
Maybe it was just really low-key foreshadowing.
It was like
Disney lore.
It was like how Pixar puts the character from their next movie somewhere in the current movie.
Exactly.
The original cinematic universe.
And speaking of Pixar, there's even a scene in A Bug's Life where they see the grasshoppers coming and one of them says, Jiminy H. Cricket!
Yeah.
The iconography is so sharp and defined and visually profound that I remember most of the scenes, and sitting here thinking, what scenes might I have forgotten? I'm actually remembering a whole bunch I haven't thought about in years.
Yeah.
Just visually. But I haven't retained how they thread together. I can probably extrapolate, well, I feel like it was something like this, but like, for the fucking life of me, I don't remember how they get to Pleasure Island or what the hell that shit is. I remember it existing, I remember them turning into donkeys. I feel like it just suddenly cut to them in a pool hall and they're in fucking Pleasure Island. Like, I believe there's a causation, but the connective tissue is what I don't remember from childhood. I remember the big set pieces.
The last time I saw this movie all the way through, I believe was about 10 years ago. The causation is wonky at times.
It's a means to an end, basically.
The means to the ends are kind of arbitrary in this movie. And there's one example in particular that's kind of laughable.
It's kind of like when we rewatched Dumbo and I went, was this whole movie really about him trying to find an act?
Yeah.
I don't remember that at all. I remember every single one of these scenes, and I don't remember that being the plot of the fucking movie.
Classic Disney was really good at standout sequences, not so good at the thematic glue that held them together.
Right.
Well, another thing this is going to have in common with Dumbo, I think, is that the most memorable visual that has become the identity of this movie is actually a very brief sequence. In the case of Dumbo, it was the flying. In the case of this, it's the nose growing.
Right.
And that's like one scene, isn't it?
Yeah, only one scene in this movie. After Snow White was such a huge success, this was heavily hyped as Walt Disney's follow-up. This is the next big, huge step forward in feature-length animation, along with Fantasia later the same year. And it looks beautiful. And there's some really striking, kind of horrifying scenes in this. Walt Disney was not afraid to go dark in the early years.
Yeah, I'm picturing the whale attacking the boat and the way it goes under the water and the violence of the waves. That shit was intense.
The whale and the donkey transformation.
The donkey
Oh my God.
transformation
Yeah.
is amazingly terrifying in
and
this
the
movie.
whole scene has this gothic noir color palette and lighting to it. It's like straight horror in the middle of it. I mean, it's not a kid's film at the time, but now we think of it as a kid's film.
Animation was always pigeonholed as a medium for children to one extent or another. Walt Disney was one of the people who kept trying to say, no, it should appeal to kids and adults. And to that end, he put a lot of horrifying stuff in his early movies.
The thing you said about Fantasia, in my head, that's the anomaly of Disney films for having Night on Bald Mountain, and it's like, nah. This is just what Disney was back then. It was a lot of really cool, really beautiful animation, and then scared the fucking shit out of you for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
They were not afraid to do so because he knew as long as he had a happy ending at the end, it would all be okay and make sense.
I'm just realizing, Night on Bald Mountain, it's the second to
It's
last thing in
followed by
Fantasia.
Ave Maria.
But like, think about it. It's the climax. Like, Ave Maria is the denouement. The climax is Night on Bald Mountain. Just like the witch in Snow White falling off the cliff. Just
Right.
like the whale in Pinocchio. Holy shit. I didn't realize Fantasia had structure. That's another one I haven't watched since I was a child.
Well, there
I
you
also
go.
actually know what some of the songs are now, and it might find it really interesting as an adult.
The original Pinocchio also kind of has the Superman problem in the sense that the first attempt at a cinematic version of it was so good that everything since then has been living in its shadow. The original Walt Disney version is such a classic that every cinematic adaptation of Pinocchio since then has sucked. I just recently did an episode of Stealing Focus with our good friends Emily and Cody Clark, where we covered the 2000 made-for-TV movie Geppetto, starring Drew Carey, which sadly is not on Disney Plus because it is batshit bonkers. Drew Carey can't sing and he can't act, and he's called upon to be the lead in a musical, and that's a problem. And also there was that horrible Jonathan Taylor
That's
Thomas
the one
movie
we saw that.
from the 90s, and the infamously terrible Roberto Benigni movie from 2002. And now, because no one fucking learns their lesson in Hollywood, Robert Zemeckis is doing a Pinocchio movie.
Although, in his defense, I'm assuming it's going to be motion capture.
The Pinocchio character will probably be motion capture.
Because I was going to say,
But I think the rest is
the
live action.
Pinocchio character is a character that would lend itself to motion capture.
Well, one would think that, but then look at Welcome to Marwen.
I was going to say, my first reaction when the news was announced was, we're going to get one Marwen-ass Pinocchio here.
Welcome back to Marwen, motherfuckers.
I didn't actually see that one, so I can't speak on that.
No one did. But anyway, back to
But
Pinocchio.
we all saw the commercials.
The original Pinocchio was kind of a flop. It was only on reissues that everyone realized, oh, we slept on this. This is actually really quite good.
Which seems to be the case with a couple different Disney classics. I know
Right.
Alice in Wonderland is another.
Alice in
one that's a lot
Wonderland,
like that.
definitely Sleeping Beauty to a certain extent.
I've actually never seen Alice in Wonderland.
Really?
Wow.
Well, we'll have to
Finally read the book a couple years back.
we'll have to fix that one of these days. Don't bother with the Tim Burton version, though.
Oh, I did see that one. A friend of mine worked at a movie theater, got me in for free.
Well, good for you. Are we ready to revisit our favorite little wooden head?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
I think you're underestimating how many wooden heads I know.
We will be right back with our thoughts, having revisited the 1940 Walt Disney classic, Pinocchio. Okay, we just watched Walt Disney's Pinocchio from 1940. That was interesting, I must say.
It is a very beautifully animated fairy tale that is significantly weirder than I remembered.
It makes absolutely no sense. The story has so many weird leaps in logic that I'm sure at the time came across as, well, yeah, it's a fairy tale. You know, of course it's going to have leaps in logic. It's about a talking puppet, for God's sake. And nowadays, so much of the storytelling techniques in this movie would not fly at all.
So this was the second feature animated film ever, right?
I forget the name of it, but the first full-length animated feature ever was some foreign-made film where the animation was really crude back in the 20s, but Snow White was really sold as the first full-length feature animation to use full Disney-style animation. So this would have been the second
widely
one.
distributed in America.
Yeah.
So for most audiences watching this, other than Snow White, in their minds, they're still thinking of cartoons as the shorts that play during newsreels. And so much humor in early animation is let's take advantage of the art form and do things you can't do in real life. Let's bend logic. Let's bend reality. So I think audiences watching a cartoon were just more willing to accept weird shit.
Absolutely.
As long as you explain the logic. So when they turn into asses, it's like, you're gonna make a jackass of yourself. Oh, it's a visual representation. That's something you can't do in real life.
Right, it's a bunch of metaphors, basically.
The movie is very episodic, as many Disney animated movies were at the time. And again, a lot of that is from the source material, sort of this series of fables piled on top of each other. It's really like somebody lumped 9 different Grimm fairy tales together that all
Pretty
happen to the
much.
same character.
The first 27 minutes take place in Geppetto's house that first night.
Yeah.
And that's insane. I didn't realize it was that much time.
Yeah, it's a very self-assured movie where what would normally be the first 10 minutes is stretched to the first 27 minutes, and yet it doesn't feel that long.
They have enough different sequences going on, and they really flow from one to the other. Mm-hmm. You could have done that first 27 minutes just as a short film, and it would have been a fantastic short film.
Absolutely.
Like, maybe cut the whole thing about one day you can be a real boy, because that's setting up stuff later. This film rides a very weird line between normal story structure and crazy sequence of events that happens in real time. Because it happens over the course of, like, what, 3 days? The whole film?
If that.
if that, yeah.
Like, you could make this whole movie take place in 24 hours if you massaged the structure a little. As a kid, it never occurred to me how quickly things were happening. Like, I didn't have a sense of Jiminy and Pinocchio have only known each other for a day or two. In my head, it's like, well, no, Pinocchio's the main character, Jiminy's his sidekick. Like, this is an established relationship. They trust each other. I didn't realize that it's like, no, this is a kid taking his first steps into the world. Everything is new and crazy.
That's how good this movie is at setting up the relationships. That's
Yeah.
the value of taking those first 27 minutes to really make sure you set up the characters and you set up what their relationships are to each other so that you really know it for sure.
The climax and resolution of, now we get to be together and you're a real boy. You spent one sleepless night knowing this kid, and then the next morning sent him off to school. Are you really this emotionally attached to him right now? Watching that 27 minutes, like, of course you are.
Yeah.
They're father and son. Like, you feel it. You understand why they invest emotionally because you've invested emotionally.
They do a really great job of setting all of that up so that the rest of the movie can play out.
They still hadn't mastered writing feature films. How do we keep an audience's attention?
Yeah.
Well, we know how to do it for 20 minutes, so if we can have 4 20-minute sequences that are with the same characters and roll into one another, then we can keep their attention.
It's the Robert Rodriguez writing El Mariachi thing.
Exactly.
Where he's like, well, I know how to write a 30-minute short film, so I'll just have everything happen 3 times when I'm writing this script.
And he inadvertently discovered the rule of 3.
Yeah, it accidentally became a decent structure for a future movie.
Several years ago, I did a collaborative 3-part video with Kyle Calgren of Brows Held High. Look up his stuff if you're not familiar with it. He's on YouTube. We did the original 1946 Jean Cocteau version of Beauty and the Beast. And the idea was that he was defending the Cocteau film and I was defending the Disney film. And one of the big sticking points in contention between the two of them is that the original French film used a lot more fairy tale logic, whereas the Disney version was definitely a fairy tale premise, but every beat in the story was very logical. It made a lot of sense. And I was defending that as the over-the-plate movie that general audiences could get behind, whereas the French film was this weird fairy tale movie that took all these leaps. And we were framing it as a divide between the Disney method and the Cocteau method, but watching this, I realize that's not where the divide was. The divide was between eras in filmmaking.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
Disney was taking just as many leaps of logic back then. This is every bit as much the logic of a dream. It's just that by the 90s, no one was buying that kind of crap. You know,
By the 90s, you had magic bean theory. You can have one magic bean in the
Yes.
movie. Dave and I, we've discussed, really, it's you have about 15 minutes to get all the weird shit in, and any other weird shit needs to logically evolve from that weird shit. Whereas in this, it's more fairy tale. It's in the tail end of the movie, no pun intended, where it's like,
Right.
oh my god, kids are turning into donkeys.
And what's interesting is, in a way, things have only gotten worse, like how the Beauty and the Beast remake specifically tried to quote-unquote fix all the plot holes of the 1991 film and
Appease
ended
the
up just
citizens, people.
dooming itself. But also, in another regard, what are the most successful films of the last few years? They've been the Marvel movies, where you have all these different magic elements on top of each other. A magic science supersuit with an Asgardian god and a talking raccoon and all this stuff piled on top of each other, and audiences are eating that shit up. So in a way, the way to be successful nowadays is to actually take a step backwards and realize maybe we only need to think the logic makes sense.
It's
Yeah.
really, the people who think they want answers
Right.
really just don't want to realize there are questions. My favorite example of deftly putting something that makes no fucking sense right in there is the time travel movie Primer. Because the
I've never
way-
seen that.
Never seen
It's
that.
a fantastic indie film by Shane Carruth where these two guys in a garage invent time travel. And the way they do it is they're working on a machine and then it has these side effects that they're like, these don't make sense. What's the deal? And time travel is the answer to the question. Oh my god, it's because of time travel. So by the point they introduce time travel, it makes sense to you because you've already been presented with other stuff that doesn't make sense, and this answers that. So it's not that it needs to explain shit. It's that you need to feel like any questions that you were conscious of were answered, and questions that it's like, yeah, we don't have an answer for that. You just need to not be conscious of.
Whereas back in the days when Pinocchio was made, questions and answers weren't even really a concern. Walt Disney trusted that people were just willing to buy fairy tale logic and write any inconsistencies off as, well, it's a fairy tale, you know, it's for kids. It's for those who are willing to open their minds and just let animation do what animation does best, which is present the impossible.
It's an escape from reality, really.
Absolutely.
Just in terms of the visual realism of the movie, the backgrounds are beautiful.
Yeah.
The character designs are, for the most part, very appealing.
I am now convinced, having rewatched this, that this style of animation is the only way the concept of Pinocchio wouldn't come off as creepy.
Absolutely.
Oh my god, yes.
The idea of a puppet that's also a boy.
I don't think it was necessarily a failing on behalf of Roberto Benigni or the makers of the Jonathan Taylor Thomas version that they couldn't pull it off, because it's unpull-offable.
It gets into the uncanny valley, and I'm sure Zemeckis' remake will have the same problem. In 2D animation, you can draw that where it looks really good, and Pinocchio's a really well-designed character where the shape of his face is just the shape of a child's face, but he's got a wooden puppet nose, and he's got rectangular arms and legs.
But don't worry, they make up for it by making everything else so much creepier.
In this movie, he looks so much creepier as a real boy.
Yes.
He looks weird when he's a real boy. When he actually gets a real human nose, it just looks unsettling for some reason. He looks so charming when he's just the puppet.
Geppetto is a very cartoony design. Honest John and Gideon are literal anthropomorphic animals.
Right.
Of the character designs, only the Blue Fairy and real boy Pinocchio really attempt any sort of non-caricature, or at least minimally caricatured realism in their designs. I think that kind of works for the Blue Fairy. It's like, oh, the magical fairy is more real than reality. It's the same principle as, like, in Calvin and Hobbes, when Calvin and Susie are playing and it looks like a soap opera comic strip. Right. It works for that. It's weird for Pinocchio.
Yeah. It really is, especially since we become acclimated to seeing him with the puppet wooden nose.
I do get that they needed to make him visually distinct as a real boy from as a puppet, but he looks out of place next to Geppetto when he's a real boy.
People think of this as a musical, and it is, but there's only 5 songs: When You Wish Upon a Star, Little Wooden Head, Give a Little Whistle, High Diddle-Dee-Dee, and I've Got No Strings. They're all in the first half of the movie, and 3 of them are in those first 27 minutes. And then the second half, there's no songs at all. Obviously, the most iconic one of those is When You Wish Upon a Star. It's interesting that that has been taken up as kind of the official theme song of Disney in general. Because A, it came from, at the time, a failed movie, and B, it's only presented as truthful within this illogical fairy tale world in which the movie takes place. I mean, Jiminy opens the movie by saying, I bet a lot of you folks don't believe that. Well, I thought it was bullshit too.
Look, I didn't used to believe in a wish and a star, but let me tell you what changed my mind. You see, I'm not just the CEO of Star Wishing, I'm also a member.
Ask your doctor if Star Wishing is right for you.
Star wishing for when you don't have a prayer.
And then he tells this completely illogical movie filled with all these nonsensical leaps that no one would actually buy, but you only accept it because it's a fairy tale.
Overhearing Geppetto's insane wish that Pinocchio become a real boy, Jiminy's line is, a very lovely thought, not at all practical. In a magic world, that is just naysaying. In a real world, that is the fucking understatement of the century.
That is one of the funniest one-liners you could have in that situation. That's like a Jim Halpert line.
Yeah.
It's a nice thought. Not at all practical.
So it's interesting that Disney has actually taken that mantra to heart and tried to sell, as long as you believe in Disney, as long as you keep consuming our products, you will get everything you want in life. And I have to wonder how many lives it's ruined. Princess and the Frog later, of course, specifically added dimension to When You Wish Upon a Star. You gotta wish upon the star, and you gotta work really hard in order to make your dreams come true.
Like, fuck that shit.
As much as it only applies in this crazy fairy tale world, it's also the song that has the least connection to the narrative.
It really is.
I also could have sworn Geppetto sung it, just because in the Pinocchio trailer, they make it look like Geppetto's singing it.
The dwarves and Jiminy Cricket have this very 30s and 40s Hollywood thing of their speaking voice is wacky and cartoony, but then they have this operatic singing voice. You know how in the late 90s, every high-pitched Disney character had a joke where their singing voice was Robert Goulet?
He had a real comeback in the 90s just doing that.
Just doing Mikey from Recess and Wheezy in Toy Story 2.
Right. Jiminy's voice actor, Cliff Edwards. People today might not know who Cliff Edwards is or was. At the time, he was Ukulele Ike. He was a fixture on radio shows, primarily. I think he had his own radio show. And casting him as Jiminy Cricket really was the Robin Williams as the genie of its day. Except it didn't inspire nearly as many copycats. It's a very similar energy at the time in the sense that he's saying a lot of things that I feel like must have been pop culture references at the time, because they don't make a lot of sense now.
He has a lot of one-liners where he's talking to either inanimate objects or animals who are slightly less sentient than him.
Right.
Or the audience.
He kind of just explains a lot of stuff to the audience.
He is the audience surrogate. I don't think we've ever discussed this on mic, but we've talked generally before about the similarities between Jiminy and Timothy Mouse.
Yeah.
Timothy had a lot more lifting to do because he was paired with a character who did not speak.
At all, right.
But they're both kind of the characters who are taking the audience along on the journey of this child discovering the world.
But let's be clear. In terms of function in the story, Jiminy Cricket is as useful as Rafiki. He teaches Pinocchio nothing.
He's terrible at his job.
Exactly.
If Pinocchio learns anything, we don't really see him learn
That's
it.
the problem. So they set up to be a real boy. What was it? It was you have to be brave,
truthful, and unselfish. Now, we got the brave and unselfish parts when he rescues Geppetto from the whale.
But they skipped the truthfulness because Geppetto asks him, how'd your ears become a donkey? And he's about to decide, should I lie, should I tell the truth? And Geppetto goes, I don't give a fuck. I'm just happy you're alive.
That's true.
We're kind of missing that.
That scene where he lies is so out of character. Up until that moment, Pinocchio was the most innocent, naive, trusting person. He was just like, oh, you say being an actor's better than being a school kid? Great, I'll be an actor. Oh, you say being an actor's temptation? Well, I believe you. Oh,
Yeah.
but they said I should be an actor. I'm going to
Very
be an actor.
easy to manipulate
It
this
seems
kid.
like he kind of just panicking and lying in that scene, but that's something that you learn much later in life, and Pinocchio was literally born yesterday.
Exactly. He doesn't know enough to know he should lie in that situation.
Right.
Because he doesn't recognize this is my fault. He trusted people. People lied to him. People threw him in a cage. Why would he have any shame over that? He doesn't know what shame is yet.
Even after he has figured out that Stromboli is bad, like he knows Stromboli is going to turn him into firewood, he's so trusting that when they're escaping and Jiminy has some sort of sarcastic, see you later, Stromboli, Pinocchio has a very sincere, goodbye, Mr. Stromboli.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's how
love
dumb Pinocchio is.
Like, I love this innocent, naive puppet who just doesn't know the world is dangerous.
He's really stupid, and it's great.
I sort of can see the thread between, oh crap, I was an innocent, naive waif to Stromboli and it got me in trouble. Maybe I need to be more cynical now. And maybe that's why he lies to the Blue Fairy. But then that doesn't explain why he's back at square one in the next scene and he's yelling, goodbye, Mr. Stromboli. And then when Honest John and Gideon find him again, he's back to being an innocent kid who believes everything they say again.
He doesn't really have much of an arc.
They never establish at the beginning that he's selfish, cowardly, or a liar.
We see him being selfish at Pleasure Island, and then he proves himself unselfish by saving Geppetto. So we get that. But the brave part, you're right, we never really see him be cowardly at the beginning.
He basically has his one heroic act of self-sacrifice at the end, so the Blue Fairy kind of works on this is the end rules.
And the closest thing we get to him being a bad kid is that one line where he says, "You're right, Lampwick. Being bad is so much more fun than being good." Mm-hmm. Even there, it's like he's being led face first into this because he's naive.
He still has yet to meet another child at this point.
Yeah.
So Lampwick is the cool older friend, and you just want to do whatever they're doing.
What are we going to do today, Spike, huh? What are we going to do today?
I'm sorry. Can we take a moment and appreciate their first conversation?
Where Pinocchio's just trying to get a word in edgewise like he's recording a podcast with him.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I have this ticket.
Like, yeah, I hear it's pretty...
Shut up.
That's one of the most honest conversations between children I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Where one of
It's
them
really
is
good.
trying to get a thought in, and the other one's half listening and talking, and they both come away from it feeling like, that was a good conversation.
It was such a relatable childhood thing to be not only trying to get a word in, but I have this specific thing I want to say. It's not even a thing that matters, but I'm so excited to tell you this one thing, and I'm going to keep trying to tell it to you.
And please validate me once I say it.
That's an interesting aspect of the early days pre-Eisner of Disney making these animated movies. You didn't have screenwriters who were really thinking about, okay, what's the natural progression of events here? You had animators making these stories, and animators, they're not necessarily great at telling stories that make sense, but animators by nature are very observant. And you get those little moments like that which properly convey something we've all seen, but not a lot of people can translate to the screen all that effectively unless you're an animator who really studies everything. I had forgotten how sociopathic Lampwick was.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he is a straight-up sociopath.
Really? As a kid, I thought he was way worse than I did as an adult. Seeing him as an adult, I went, oh, he's just a dumbass kid.
Well, that,
He's
but...
just some hoodlum.
As a kid, I thought he was a villain. Like
Oh,
an
yeah,
evil
yeah.
villain. As an adult, it's like, oh, he's given a context where he's told he can do anything. He's like, awesome, I'm gonna do stuff.
He's basically an Eddie Haskell.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
the
Yes.
bad influence friend. But that said, if he is a villain, He's the only villain who gets a comeuppance in this movie.
Yeah, that's the other thing. None of the villains, aside from arguably Lampwick, get any comeuppance. Stromboli gets his meal ticket taken away, but he's still in business. He doesn't really get significantly punished for it.
Yeah.
He still has all that money. Honest John and Gideon live to scam more kids another day. The coachman is going to continue his business. Monstro gets hit in the head, but we don't see that he died.
Monstro is the closest to a comeuppance, and even he is only a villain because of the food chain.
That's one of the areas where this film is darker than I remember. It tells us you can't really defeat evil, you can only escape from it.
I guess Monstro gets his comeuppance in Storybook Land, where they
Sure.
cut his tail off and you can just float right
Yeah,
through
they don't
there.
do that in the movie. Of course, then they wouldn't have the big, huge chase scene, which is way more intense than I remember.
Holy crap.
That was fantastic.
The animation was amazing.
The shots of Monstro leaping out of the water are just spectacular. The level of detail is insane.
Incredible.
Especially when you compare it to later Disney films. You can see like every drop of water in the waves there.
And it's the character design and the movement. Like you
Yeah.
said,
Right.
it's so detailed.
So much effort put into something so batshit.
I know.
Yeah.
And, there's so many little moments of the animators just showing off because they can. Like, for example, during Little Woodenhead, when you see the reflection of Pinocchio off of Cleo's goldfish bowl, and it becomes like a funhouse mirror version of Pinocchio. Like, it took effort to figure out how to distort Pinocchio's body like
How is
that.
this
but,
specific face going to bend?
but it looked great.
You do that now, you just do it in post-production with some warp tools, but they had to draw every frame. When you're drawing it frame by frame, you have total control over how it's going to be distorted, but that's still a lot of work for that sort of effect.
And you have to anticipate how it will look moving. Yeah, you can adjust how it distorts, but the distortion is in the movement. That's what makes it look realistic. Or at least believable.
Also, the whole underwater sequence, what they were doing with light and shadow and ripple, that was some
Right.
more
How did
amazing.
they do that back in
full-on forgot that
1940?
existed. The fact that the fairy's translucent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't need to do that.
In later decades, they were seriously wondering, how did they do this back in the day? I remember on the Fantasia Blu-ray, there was a special feature about one of the technical guys who worked on Fantasia, who worked out a lot of that stuff. And literally, they only found out how he did a lot of those techniques because the granddaughter of the guy who worked on it found like an old journal of his up in her attic. Walt was really concerned with putting as much money and effort into these movies as possible. Can you imagine what might have been, A, if Pinocchio and Fantasia had been received better, and B, if World War II hadn't happened and hadn't drained the resources of his studios and forced him to do all those compilation features of the 40s, and then by the time he finally got into doing a film with one consistent narrative all the way through, with Cinderella in 1950, he had to reduce the ambition of those movies. It's fascinating to imagine what might have been.
One thing that a lot of Disney movies did was start with a storybook. This was the only one where there's actually a character interacting with the storybook. And not just the book opening
and
on its
the
own.
page is closing on him and he has to hold it open with the camera. That was a nice
That's a fun little gag. I like that.
Yeah.
So one, that's what paved the way eventually to Shrek using the storybook to wipe his ass, I guess.
Yep.
Fairy tale logic and also Disney cartoon logic can justify why Jiminy Cricket has a big book about his own story. But I never noticed before this time, the other books on the shelf are Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland.
Yes,
which
I've
would be
noticed that.
Predicting
later,
the future.
later Disney movies. I have to imagine Walt already was thinking of those as possible projects.
Well, he had already done the Alice shorts.
That's true. He had
Predating
done the Alice
Mickey,
comedies.
There had been a live-action version of Peter Pan, hadn't there?
I
silent
think so.
film. The silent
yeah,
film.
the silent film.
There was, okay, Nick and I saw this once when we were kids. That was a fairly straightforward version of Peter Pan. The one thing that threw us towards the end was when all the kids are being captured by the pirates and Hook is like, join us. John and Michael are like, we'll never join you because we are honest American children. It's like, what? Wait, you're fucking American in this version?
Yeah, it was crazy.
Sure,
It was like
why not?
the first indication was Michael was just like, you need to behave like American gentlemen. And we went,
Good God.
I'm sorry, hold the phone. And then when they defeat the pirates, they hoisted an American flag above the
Of course they did.
America!
Fuck yeah.
Now, being a silent film, it's possible that they localized it for every market.
Probably.
And just replaced that flag shot and replaced the subtitles.
Still not as dumb as Pan. So,
Yeah.
in terms of technique, we should probably say I do believe this was the first feature to use the multiplane camera.
I think the first short that used it was the old
The
mill,
old
if I'm
mill,
not
yeah,
mistaken.
which came out the same year as Snow White. So maybe Snow White was able to get a few multiplane shots in under the wire, but this was the first movie that really used it a lot and really used it effectively.
And that
don't-
one
I
shot,
don't-
my God, it's so good.
When Jiminy's starting to tell the story, he has the line about, like, so I hopped up in, and
The camera hops over there.
yeah, it's a POV shot of hopping.
Nice hopping.
Which, on the surface, seems like it would be a very easy shot. Oh, there's no characters. This is just the cheap, lazy
Sure.
way. Because it looks like it's just zooming in. But the closer you get, you see, oh, the background through the window is multiplaned. They put more effort into that shot than they really needed to.
Which was kind of Walt's calling card back in the day when they made films like Pinocchio and Fantasia. And then as the years went on and Walt was distracted by all these other projects, that all kind of fell by the wayside.
The most famous multiplane shot in this movie, probably, and it's a beautiful shot, the next day, after the 27-minute long Geppetto's nighttime scene, it's the morning shot. It's swooping through the village. It's basically a helicopter shot.
Right.
It starts at the top of the village. We see some birds. It's moving through the village, all the different houses moving at different planes. And then it's just a solid minute or two of children running through the streets while this is happening. And it's a shot that is in no way necessary for the story or to communicate anything. It is just them showing off, and they've earned it.
Absolutely.
It is good showing
It's
off.
a great shot.
There were simpler ways to convey the same mood it's going for, but it's such a beautiful, well-crafted, technically advanced shot, and it probably does convey the tone a lot better than just a static establishing shot would have.
Well, the other thing it does, it populates the world. in a
that's
way.
true. That's
because there
true.
are like 8 characters in this whole damn movie. And so to see a bunch of kids early on, oh, Geppetto isn't just suffering from a hallucination or dementia or something and like, you gotta go to school in this ghost town. Like, no, there really is a school. There really are kids going there.
Pinocchio's not just a hallucination who is also hallucinated by the giant fox and cat who someone else is
So
hallucinating.
weird that he's a fox.
You've got the goofy Pluto problem where you've got Gideon, who's a cat, but he walks upright on 2 legs. But then you also got Figaro, who's just a normal cat.
Well, and on top of that, Gideon doesn't talk.
Right.
Which means other than Jiminy Cricket, who's telling the story and who's cricket-sized, the fox is the only anthropomorphized character.
We finally have an answer to what does the fox say.
Yeah.
He says, hi diddly-dee. Interesting thing about Gideon, like you said, he doesn't actually say anything. At one point, he was going to have dialogue, and then ultimately, Walt decided, no, you know what? Let's just not have him speak. But they actually brought a voice actor in to do his dialogue, and that voice actor's name was Mel Blanc.
Of course it was.
This was the one animated feature for Disney that Mel Blanc worked on, and all that's left of it is when Gideon hiccups. That is Mel
Wow.
Blanc's hiccup in the movie.
I'm sort of assuming there was a lot of Harpo Marx influence on Gideon.
Yeah, absolutely.
But-
yeah, it was a classic comedy team like they had back in the day, like Laurel and Hardy or something. But man, how much of a mindfuck would it be nowadays to hear Mel Blanc's voice in a Disney
In a
movie?
Disney movie. Maybe the trajectory would have been different. Maybe he would have
Maybe.
become one of the go-to Disney guys if he
Yeah,
had
Yeah,
stayed
'cause
in
this was before he became the big Warner Brothers star. This was 1940, the same year that the first Bugs Bunny cartoon came out. Another interesting voice actor in this, though for a completely different reason, is the voice of Geppetto, Christian Rubb.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the interesting thing about Christian Rubb, like I said, this movie came out in 1940, which means they would have been working on this like 38, 39. Christian Rubb was a Nazi sympathizer.
Yay!
I'm not
Yay.
kidding. He used to bug the animators relentlessly about Hitler's New World Order and how he was going to fix everything. He had completely swallowed the Hitler Kool-Aid.
Really, bugging about how a fascist is going to fix the world. I can't relate to that.
No,
no one
not
in
at
my
all.
life
That-
sounds
that-
like that.
None of us have lived through any of that.
No,
Oh,
of course
God.
not.
Well, let's take a look at Geppetto the character then.
Okay.
Because having not seen it in a while, at first I was just thinking the obvious joke of Geppetto is going to be he's this weird, pathetic guy who talks to his pets and wishes he had a son. He makes a toy and anthropomorphizes that toy, and It's really depressing when you think about it. But I forgot about not only his behavior towards the animals, where he is kicking them around, knocking them all over.
Figaro open the window. Why the hell can't you do it?
The window is right next to your bed.
Yeah, it's closer for him. All he would need to do is just wake himself up, which Figaro's falling asleep too. You lazy bastard.
In fact, you built Figaro a bed just to make him farther away, because after that point, he sleeps in your bed for the rest of the movie.
He also seemed to build Pinocchio just to take his side in arguments with his pets.
Kinda.
I'll call him Pinocchio. Do you like it, Figaro? No. You like it, Cleo?
No.
Well, Pinocchio, you like it, right? And he makes Pinocchio nod his head yes. Fine, 2 against 1, I win. I'm an insane old man who talks to my pets.
But it's still 2 against 2.
And I'm pretty sure
demand a
Jiminy didn't
recount.
like it either, though. So, like, if he was counting everyone in the room...
And then Honest John can't spell Pinocchio's name. It's interesting that they keep making fun of the name Pinocchio, which feels to me like Disney just going, well, it's a really great story, but Pinocchio is kind of a weird name, so let's just have the characters make fun of how weird it is.
This is the original version of Jughead's I'm Weird monologue from Riverdale.
You ever see me without these stupid strings? Geppetto's playing around with Pinocchio and torturing the cat with him. And on top of all that, when Geppetto wishes upon a star for his sad, pathetic wish that the thing he just carved would become alive and he could imprint his fatherhood on it, the blue fairy comes and says, and I quote, "Good Geppetto, you have given so much happiness to others." We sure
Really?
haven't seen any of that.
No, we have not.
And again, this is analyzing it in modern screenwriting terms.
Sure.
We haven't seen Geppetto save the cat. We've seen Geppetto kick the cat a lot.
It seems more like he would be the guy who would be getting all of the noise complaints
Yeah.
throughout
He
the
did
neighborhood.
fire a gun at 3 in the morning for no fucking
This
reason.
guy fired a gun at 3 in the morning. He's singing. He's got all his clocks going.
How many times has he used that gun for target practice on poor Figaro?
Oh, no.
Well,
this
here's the
apple
other
on your
thing.
head?
I mean,
This is why Minnie ended up adopting Figaro as her cat.
Yes, exactly.
I get that Figaro now is just a little kitten. Does he have any idea how dangerous it's going to be to have a full-grown cat in a house where there are delicate things on shelves?
Oh my
Like,
god.
the cat is going to knock down
Oh my
all
god,
that.
it broke. I'm gonna knock this thing over. Oh my god, it broke.
This is what cats call helping. Maybe that's why he's angry at Figaro.
I think
'cause
it's like a Wallace and Gromit thing, where really the cat's taking care of him.
probably.
Yeah.
Geppetto is a demented old man who makes his cat do his chores and talks to a puppet and says, "Boy, I wish you were a kid. Ever since Deborah left me, I can't have any kids anymore."
In an entirely,
Arguably, before Deborah left you, couldn't have any kids anymore.
in an entirely different movie, Geppetto would just be a crazy old man in the loony bin already.
It's Garfield minus Garfield.
Yes,
Geppetto
that's
minus
Oh my
Pinocchio.
God.
Pinocchio minus Pinocchio.
Holy shit.
Based on the way he did treat his pets, and then even Pinocchio to some extent, in that first 27 minutes, if it had been a 27-minute short, Figaro would have been the main character.
Sure,
Yeah.
The cat who's fed up with its owner's shit, that is 100% the protagonist.
Keep in mind, this was 1940, back when animal abuse wasn't even a thing anyone thought about. Like,
Wait.
people abused animals
That
left
was
and
just
right
Tuesday.
back then.
Chandler is the only one here who has actually seen Mickey and Minnie's
Oh,
Runaway
yes,
Railway so
yes,
far.
I was thinking
Right.
about this.
But apparently there is a gag in the pre-show where Minnie knocks into Pluto or something.
And Pluto gets hit in the head,
Yeah.
and people are complaining animal abuse, even though it's a fucking cartoon.
It's a cartoon, and
Slapstick.
Pluto
Who
is
gives a
fine
shit?
in the next scene.
Animal abuse has always been part of Disney's legacy.
Absolutely. They knock all those animals at Animal Kingdom with a frying pan when the lights are out.
On top of Geppetto's behavior towards the animals, he also has a lot of really interesting depictions of abuse in
the
his
clocks he
Clocks.
makes. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's talk about those clocks.
In his
'cause
weird
the
not
movie
clocks.
spends a lot of time on them.
A lot of abuse clocks.
Which, by the way, I believe was the inspiration for the opening scene in Back to the Future, I'm guessing.
I wouldn't be surprised. Now, to be clear, all the clocks are very clever gags.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
they are very cute cuckoo clock gags with weird little repetitive motions, basically. Before the days of Vine kids, we had cuckoo clocks.
Well, now we're up to TikTok, so it's all come full circle.
The kids don't even know what Vine is anymore. I'm so old.
This is how much the internet has poisoned our brains. When the clock started ticking in rhythm like tick-tock, tick-tock, tick, we started doing the mysterious ticking noise. Snape, Snape,
Severus
Snape.
Dumbledore,
Snape.
etc.
Severus.
The internet.
Toy makers are coded as being people who spread happiness, and I'm not denying that it's an accurate depiction of the time to have some really fucked up, creepy toys.
Right.
One of them was a mother spanking a child.
Yeah,
One of them
That was the worst one.
One of them was a hunter trying to chop a turkey's head off.
And the turkey kept retracting, and
That bothered me so much as a kid. It was like, cut the damn head off. It was like when you open
So
a
wait.
parentheses and don't close it, and it's like
So
that
that's
itch
what
on the
bothered
back of
you.
your
So
mind,
wait.
that OCD
It bothered
thing,
you?
an unfinished task. Like, cut the fucking head off already.
So wait a minute. It didn't bother you that he was going to kill the turkey, that the turkey was going
the
to die. It bothered.
anticipation was worse.
Just do it already.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. Got a good beat on what kind of person Nick is.
Oh, I have more. Don't get me started on the Marionettes Dancing with Pinocchio.
Oh, man.
There was a hunter shooting something, like
Right.
Another
shooting-
bird.
Yeah,
I don't
shooting
remember
a
the
lot
bird
of bird
specifically.
abuse here.
Geppetto just hates birds.
And yet, a magic bird ends up telling Pinocchio where Geppetto is.
The magic bird who delivers the next pages of the script. There was one piece of pure animation logic for a gag early on where Jiminy's trying to sleep and there's just so much noise. The clocks are suddenly getting louder. Geppetto has his sleep apnea. Everything is going. Jiminy yells, quiet, and it makes the clock stand still.
After all, enough's enough.
And it's a more absurd version of a gag that they later borrowed in the Aristocats.
Yeah.
But this is the actual cartoony, silly version of that gag. Well, of course, clocks can't stop when someone yells, but they can in a cartoon.
But also, Jiminy, this is not your house.
Yeah,
You
that-
don't
that
have
too.
any
You
right
don't
to-
pay rent.
Jiminy is very entitled. He's like, don't I get a badge or something?
At the end when he gets the badge, that felt so much like Clarence getting his wings.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Even though that was 1946 and this was 1940.
Pinocchio wasn't a very big hit, but it was still Walt's follow-up to Snow White, so a good amount of people in Hollywood still saw it. So yeah, maybe that was a direct reference.
But like, given what a small factor it was in this movie versus in the other one,
Right.
it would make sense to me if the other one came first, and in this, it's just, oh, that's a trope we're all familiar with. Let's
Every
slap
time
it
a
in
bell
there.
rings, a cricket gets its gold medal.
Well, the other thing
Not
that
as catchy.
definitely would be seen as a reference if it came after the other movie is when Jiminy is in the hole of the pool table.
The 8-ball follows him in, and he grabs his hat out of the way before this boulder-sized
Right.
pool
Oh
ball.
my God.
And I was like, Jesus Christ, this is Raiders of the Lost Ark. They even fucked up the reference like everyone does and grabbed the hat instead of the whip.
Instead of the whip,
It's
yeah.
the two references they do of the grabbing the thing and the boulder combined into one.
It was played exactly like every modern cartoon plays their, quote, Indiana Jones scene.
Right. Well, Indiana Jones ripped off everything that came before it, so maybe that was the reference there.
It's also possible that both the boulder scene in Indy and the pool table scene in here are ripping off the same old serial
Sure.
we just don't remember.
Probably.
It's possible.
Spielberg and Lucas were both huge vintage Disney fans. In fact, I might be misremembering because I haven't seen it in a long time, but isn't there a scene in Close Encounters where the dad wants to take his kids to see Pinocchio?
I'm going to give you your choice. I'm not going to be biased in any way. Tomorrow night, you can either play goofy golf, which means a lot of waiting and shoving and pushing and probably getting a 0, or you can see Pinocchio, which is a lot of furry animals and magic, and you'll have a wonderful time. Okay? Now let's vote.
There's a recurring thing of Geppetto responding before he realizes what's going on,
Yeah.
and then responding correctly.
like-
I feel so safe that he has a gun under his pillow when he responds
know,
before knowing
right?
what's
Shoot
going
first,
on.
ask questions later. Geppetto shot first.
When Pinocchio makes all that racket and Geppetto says, "Who is it?" "It's me." "Oh, it's me."
Yeah.
What? It does the double take.
That reminded me of the Get Smart joke where he knocks on the door to the secret headquarters and they're like, "Who is it?" He goes, "It's me." And they open the door and they're like, "How'd you know that would work?" He goes, "Me is somebody everyone knows."
Probably the biggest laugh in this when Pinocchio does turn into a real boy and Geppetto's still grief-stricken. He's saying, "Father, no, you're dead, Pinocchio.
Yeah.
Lie down.
Now-
You're dead. You're dead." And it takes him a while.
Why are you crying? Because you're dead, Pinocchio. You could pass it off as he thinks he's just hearing the voice in his head. But the fact that he says, "Now lie down," brings it to, you're not even being dead right, son. Come on.
How is Geppetto just sending this child that nobody has ever seen before to school with no explanation.
Yeah, registrations were a lot looser back then.
It's fairy tale logic,
Yeah,
folks. What are you going to do?
Geppetto is so excited to finally have a son, then he just sends him off right away. So many parents I know whose kids are just old enough to start going to school talk about how, like, oh, I didn't want to leave them. And Geppetto's just like, oh, I'm so excited to finally have a son. Now scram.
Okay, bye.
That felt like old man logic to me, where it's like, oh, I have a kid. You must go to school now. Okay, Grandpa.
Okay, Nazi sympathizer.
That's just the trouble with the world today. You know, people not paying attention to their conscience. Like, these kids today not following their consciences.
Also,
These kids today turning into donkeys.
I didn't remember that Jiminy Cricket, when he showed up, was just sort of a stereotype of a hobo.
Yeah.
Like, he's literally dressed like a hobo, and then he gets this dapper suit.
He's checking his own reflection out, and then Pinocchio comes up behind him, and Jiminy's like, oh, I forgot you were there.
I forgot that you were the whole reason I'm doing this job that I got hired for.
Yeah, this movie is just full of sociopaths. Geppetto's kicking the cat. Jiminy doesn't even know Pinocchio's there. Even Pinocchio goes outside in broad daylight for the first time, and he looks at the other kids and says, what are those? Wow, he needs an explanation of what other people are. That's
You want
a
to be a boy
sociopath
so
to a
bad,
T.
you don't even know what it is.
At least Pinocchio is the only one whose sociopath tendencies are justified by he was born yesterday.
Sure, and he does eventually get better at this, but they don't really put a fine point on the fact that for the first 2/3 of the film, Pinocchio only feels remorse when he personally feels consequences.
Yeah.
He doesn't feel bad about abandoning Geppetto until Stromboli fucking locks him in a cage, and then all of a sudden, oh no,
I should have listened to you.
Stromboli basically treats Pinocchio like Disney treats all their teen actors.
Yep.
But then fucking John and Gideon lure him away to his doom once again, and he only feels consequences when he starts seeing Lampwick turn into a donkey, and then he turns into a donkey. Actually, he doesn't even feel remorse at Lampwick turning into a donkey. He laughs at Lampwick, and it's only when he turns into a donkey that he starts...
Oh shit, this is happening to me too.
Yeah.
By the way, that transformation scene... so amazing.
Oh my
That was
The
horrifying.
animation was incredible.
That was like a scene out of like the original Wolfman. Did it do the shadow trick? Because that's a classic thing in werewolf movies.
Yeah.
I know
Did
this.
that predate this and this was like a
I
reference
think so,
to that?
yeah.
We were looking at the opening credits. Art Babbitt worked on this.
Yeah, Art Babbitt. This was one of the last films he worked on before the strike. Art Babbitt did a lot of the Geppetto animation, if I'm not mistaken. The primary animator of Jiminy Cricket was Ward Kimball. That was his first big, huge job that actually made it to the screen, because Ward Kimball also animated a scene in Snow White, the music in your soup sequence, which got cut. And giving Ward Jiminy Cricket to do was kind of Walt's way of apologizing.
We also saw in the credits Franklin Thomas.
Franklin Thomas and Oliver M. Johnston.
Yeah.
Very formal.
We had spoken before about how much technique and artistry there is in this movie when we talked
Right.
about Frank and Ollie.
Yeah.
The movements of the cat. Figaro, when he like nuzzles up against things,
Right,
or the
right.
fact that like his walking
Yeah.
movement isn't just a repeated series of cells. They designed a complex walking movement for him that gives
Absolutely.
it so much more life and bounce and energy.
Figaro's a real cat, and I just want to pet him.
I know, right? We're like, oh my gosh, a kitty!
I'll
I'm sorry,
treat
you don't
you
have to
better
include
than
that.
Geppetto did.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of talented animators worked on this. They all did good work. At least one of these animators seemed to have some sort of an anal fixation.
Yeah.
There is
There is
lot.
a lot of butt stuff in this movie.
It starts off innocently enough where Jiminy's warming his butt in the fire and like,
The narration says, I was just warming my, myself. Very subtle.
But then at one point while he's on the shelf, he puts his hand on a toy's
Yeah,
ass.
he leans on a toy doing the Kim Kardashian break the internet pose,
Yeah, exactly.
essentially.
And then,
says, oh, excuse me, miss.
And then there's the one cuckoo clock
Can we
that's
talk about how horny Jiminy is in this movie?
Yeah, I was
Horny
waiting
for
for that to
toys.
come
He
up.
lusts after every female puppet in the whole damn movie, and it becomes creepy after a while.
And he's
Yeah.
supposed to be the conscience.
Yeah.
I trust Pinocchio way more than I trust Jiminy.
Yeah, Jiminy's gonna get Me Too'd.
the other ass stuff. There's
I'm sorry, just hearing the phrase "the other ass stuff" when talking about Pinocchio. Sorry,
Pinocchio,
continue.
the other ass stuff. There's the cuckoo clock with the spanking, as we mentioned.
Bare ass spanking too.
Yeah, bare
We
ass.
didn't mention
bare
that.
ass.
Bare ass spanking on that cuckoo clock. During Give a Little Whistle, Jiminy gets whipped in the butt with a violin string.
That's true. So
Which,
much
by the way,
butt stuff.
Not how a violin works.
No.
Not at all. The milkmaids during Got No Strings kind of squish Pinocchio between their butts. Pinocchio kicks his own butt during Got No Strings. This This was just the butt stuff I noticed in this movie. I wasn't looking for it. It just jumped out
When
at
Geppetto
me.
made Pinocchio kick Figaro, didn't he kick him in the butt?
Yeah,
Probably.
kicked him in the butt.
So basically, this is kind of like Quentin Tarantino doing all the stuff with feet in his movies.
Oh, yeah.
Although, to be fair, I feel like a lot of early animation violence was targeting the butt. Am
Pretty
I wrong
much.
about this? I feel like
You're
I
not
grew
wrong.
up.
You're not
I feel
wrong.
like
Targeting the
growing
thick
up,
seat.
I watched a lot of people get injured in the butt.
They even sing about Pinocchio's butt. In Little Wooden Head, he says, little wooden seat in case
Little
you
wooden
fall.
seat in case you fall.
By the way, it's supposed to take place in Italy, and Stromboli's the only one with an Italian accent.
Yeah,
Like,
it's Lumiere rules.
Geppetto speaks with a German accent of all things, which I guess is why
Well,
the
he makes
voice
some
actor was a
prison
Nazi
blocks,
sympathizer.
so
Honest John talks about how they tried to put one over by Stromboli in the past by tying strings to Gideon and passing him off as a puppet. To what end? Yeah. Your scam to get money out of Stromboli was to sell your own partner to him.
You can always get a new partner.
You can make a shitty puppet and sell it to him.
Like, how's Gideon going to get away with the cash?
That's like an Always Sunny level of, wait, what's the scam here?
This is a chicken and steak and air miles scam?
Yeah, exactly.
That's on the same level as in The Good Place, the heist. Oh, I'm going to lock myself in a safe with a snorkel. And trust me, bro, it's going to work.
Honest John is the original Jason Mendoza.
and then it's just like, oh, hey, a wooden boy. This actually fits our needs perfectly. Look at that.
It's literally seconds after they introduce that Stromboli exists. Oh my god, a wooden boy. And all of that happens seconds after we meet Honest John.
How long do you think it took for whoever was in charge of actually creating the puppet show to write that song? In universe.
I am going to
It's a fairy tale.
Yeah.
It is a fairy tale, but I still have some questions I was asking that I didn't ask as a kid, so they're clearly not that important for the movie to work for its intended audience.
Sure.
Right.
But at the same time, some of the in-universe logistics I was just curious about. Who is Stromboli's puppeteer?
Are they union?
I would doubt it.
It's not Stromboli because he's in the audience.
Maybe
He's
it's
in
an
the audience.
automated, like, machine thing. Like, he cranks the thing from the audience.
I
Maybe.
guess so.
Usually, when we see a picture book depiction of the scene, we see Stromboli puppeteering everyone. We see nobody else is on his
I
traveling
mean, obviously,
team.
Pinocchio has no strings, but what about all his other puppets?
Yeah. Does he just get local non-union puppeteers and just stiff them too?
They are really coordinated.
He was the villain in a Walt-era Disney film, so he probably did have a union.
That's probably
because
true,
he was a
actually.
communist.
Well, since the hero was a Nazi sympathizer, then
Sure.
the villain had to be a communist. It doesn't seem like there was that much rehearsal for Got No Strings because
Right.
Stromboli is like, well, I hope this will work while he's giving the big speech. In my memory, I was convinced that we actually see Honest John and Gideon sell Pinocchio to Stromboli, and we don't.
No, that blew my mind when it was just Stromboli's event.
We later see them sell Pinocchio to the coachman in a scene which I realize is very reminiscent of the scene in Beauty and the Beast.
I used
Yeah.
to get them mixed up in my head all the time.
Yeah, let's just do that scene from Pinocchio again.
Here's my question, though.
But
That
let's add
giant-
Tony J.
That giant-ass bag of gold, was that just for Pinocchio? Or did they run around gathering up all those kids? Because how much is he selling those fucking donkeys for if he can spend all that on Pinocchio when
It's
he
a
knows some of them are
fairy
rejects
tale.
who are still going to talk?
Honest John is basically one of those modeling agencies in a mall kiosk who
Oh,
is probably
God.
a child trafficker who's like
man.
preying on, say, you could be a star. Here's the card.
You
When
could
I
be
was
on
like
Disney
22,
Channel.
someone tried to con me with that. With the,
Oh,
you
man.
could be an actor. Like, all you have to do is pay to be in this showcase.
The coachman whispers all this stuff in Honest John's ear. I'm gonna... And then finally you hear him say, and then I takes him to Pleasure Island. What was he whispering? Because that's the first step we see of what he does to Pinocchio. What does he do to these kids before he takes them to Pleasure Island?
Yeah, this movie is very child molesting.
Yeah.
This is bad touch all
There's-
over
Now,
it.
to be fair, most old fairy tales are.
Oh, yeah.
Sure, but like even scenes that didn't have to be child molesty, like when he's pretending to be a doctor to diagnose Pinocchio.
Oh, yeah.
Like he touched Pinocchio way more than he needed to make that joke land.
There was probably butt stuff there, too, that I just missed.
There was, oh my god, the cat tried to reach into Pinocchio's back pocket.
Unlike the fish later who's just checking out Jiminy's dick while he's putting the rock in there.
The Blue Fairy is the only female character in this.
Living character. You got the Marionettes.
Oh, the Marionettes, right.
Who have female voices, so unless Stromboli or his puppeteers are just really good at getting those pitches, presumably there at one point was a female in universe who recorded.
They were the Frank Oz's of their time.
Sure.
The fish is the other female character. She's clearly coded female.
You're welcome, women.
I feel like a modern filmmaker would really have hammered in the irony of, oh, there's no strings on you, but you're in a cage.
Right.
You say I got no strings on me, but you're not free.
Also, if Pinocchio was actually a pathological liar, if that was part of his arc, because he has to learn to be truthful, it's like, you're trapped by your lies and blah, blah, blah. Your strings, I don't know.
A modern filmmaker would have tried to connect the disparate threads more.
I guarantee you they will put all that shit in the Zemeckis remake, and we're calling it right now.
And I am going on record here as saying that method is neither better nor worse. It can be good or it can suck.
Oh, yeah.
Depending on if there are themes that are worth connecting.
In the intro, when I said there was one narrative leap in particular, which was a big, oh, come on, that was particularly laughable, that magic bird delivering the message was some bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, there's fairy tale logic, and then there's, okay, we wrote ourselves into a corner. Fuck it, magic bird.
The music sting when the bird shows up is the same kind of music sting when the blue fairy shows up. So we're sort of meant to assume that it's the same magic of the blue fairy. But then, one, the blue fairy has shown up to actually help. Mm-hmm. And the dove did not offer any actual useful help other than, hey, here's where your father is. The last time we saw Geppetto before this, he was wandering alone in the rain, having left Figaro and Cleo at home.
Right.
I guess at some point he went back to get them.
It's very convoluted storytelling, because also, Jiminy and Pinocchio have to swim their way away from Pleasure Island. Why not just have the whale eat them then, and then they find Geppetto?
Yeah.
That would have been a lot more economical.
It would
That
have
would
been
cut 10 minutes from the story, at least.
It would have been more streamlined, and it would not have been any weirder of a coincidence
No.
than the coincidences that already happened.
Not at all. And of course, the whale doesn't have any innards. He opens his mouth and his stomach is just there. There's no throat or
The
anything.
problem is Geppetto's going to starve to death, not that he's going to be digested.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe that's what Geppetto's trials are for being such a dick to animals.
You get to go full Jonah.
This film actually does have a pretty good setup and payoff, which is kind of subtle. In the first act, when Pinocchio accidentally burns his finger because he doesn't know what fire is.
Shit.
And then Geppetto has to put out his finger in the goldfish bowl. Then later, Pinocchio has the idea to use fire to get them out of Monstro. That's actually him learning something.
There is kind of a recurring fire motif, because also Stromboli's threat to Pinocchio is, when you're no longer useful, I'll make you into firewood. So by this point, Pinocchio has learned fire bad.
Yes.
Pinocchio has learned the Frankenstein
Pinocchio's
rule.
basically Frankenstein.
His name's not actually Pinocchio, it's Pinocchio's puppet.
And then he smokes the cigar and it makes him sick.
So much smoking in this movie.
Everyone gets so fixated on the nose growing, but smoke and fire is a much more prevalent motif throughout this movie. Not only the cigar smoking on Pleasure Island, which is what I remembered, but also Geppetto smokes a pipe in
Geppetto
bed.
smokes a pipe.
Honest John and Gideon have cigars when they're talking to the coachman.
Coachman has a pipe.
The coachman has a pipe. So much smoking. And we forgot to talk about this when we did Newsies. Disney Plus put a PSA before Newsies, the Broadway musical, that was Cruella de Vil footage. That was an anti-smoking PSA. They did not put that in front of this.
No.
We just got the little caption in the corner that says contains tobacco depictions.
And I don't even remember that much smoking in Newsies, the Broadway musical.
The opening line of Carrying the Banner, someone says, "That's my cigar," and then I think
That's it. And there's so much actual smoking
But in this one, you
damn
see the
movie.
consequences of smoking.
You see Pinocchio's consequences of smoking. You don't see any consequences of fucking Geppetto smoking in bed.
Smoking in bed, the
Smoking in
leading
bed is
cause
fine.
of fires
Smoking-
in fiction.
Smoking somewhere else is not good. You'll get sick from that. Maybe.
Now,
and
what
maybe
you
get
do
turned into a donkey.
Now, what you
Maybe.
smoke in the privacy of your own home is your own business, kids.
A few years ago, there was this indie film that came out called The Florida Project, which we actually covered for one movie later because it has a scene at the very end where the main characters actually run to Disney World. It's about these broke kids who live in a motel in Kissimmee, Florida with their broke-ass parents. One thing we pointed out there, but the metaphor's even stronger now that we've seen the original Pinocchio, there's a scene where the kids break into a dilapidated house and just start breaking shit just for fun because they're kids. They don't know any better, and they accidentally set the place on fire, and that ends up kicking off a series of events. And I noticed at the time, there's one shot while they're breaking stuff where on one of the walls of this dilapidated house, you see Lampwick graffitied on. So that's a connection to Pleasure Island. That was the brilliant thing about the Florida Project, is that the specter of Disney World is intentionally and unintentionally omnipresent in the movie, both subtly and overtly. And yet the plot of the Florida Project itself is in its own way kind of its own version of a Disney fairy tale. There's all these allusions to Disney movies in it, and one of them is the break in the house Pleasure Island scene. So that's praise for that movie. Go check it out, and then go check out our one movie later of it, which Nick was in.
Yes, I quite enjoyed that movie, and I really enjoyed that scene where they accidentally set the house on fire. It's fantastic.
The one other big logic question I had was, are they resetting the model house for every batch of boys on Pleasure Island?
They did not need to make that model house that intricate.
I understand the catharsis for the kids of getting to smash up something that was so pristine.
Sure.
But for their purposes, it could have already been a wreck and the kids would have still been just as happy to smash it up.
And also, that's actually a real thing that exists now. There's actually smash room things that you can go to and pay to destroy, like old TVs and God knows what else with golf clubs and bats and shit.
Wear goggles. So, in the Jonathan Taylor Thomas version, they go out of their way to say all those kids from Pleasure Island got turned back into humans. And I really appreciated that as a kid, going, oh, okay, good, that's a lot less fucked up. Even as an adult watching this, it's more disturbing to me now.
Yeah.
In the charming animated version, the world is just evil.
Those donkeys crying out for their moms? Jesus
God
Christ.
damn.
We never
That
see
is
those kids
fucking
again.
brutal.
Film's not afraid to go there, man.
The film seems to have the attitude of, yeah, you dumb assholes, it's your own fucking fault.
You went
Fuck
there
those
When they're
kids.
kids. I
Fuck
mean,
those kids for wanting to go to the theme park.
Pleasure Island in Walt's day was really his commentary on places like Coney Island. The kind of place he would later actively reject with his initial design of Disneyland. That's why Walt didn't allow any alcohol in Disneyland, because he was really fighting against the whole Coney Island model. But years later, Disney has rewritten the rules so much of what constitutes theme park entertainment that, you know, it's okay to bend those rules a little, I guess.
And now we have Oga's Cantina, which is great.
And
We
apparently
also-
Walt thought pool was bad.
Yeah,
With a
Like
capital
playing
T.
pool is listed up
Well,
there with
it's-
all the other shit.
Well, it's Music Man logic.
Yeah, Harold
where-
Hill
Capital
got to
T,
him.
and that rhymes with P, and that stands for pool.
Was it John Hench was the Imagineer who, when DCA opened, said, I preferred the parking lot?
I think it might have been Hench, but I can't remember for
That's
certain.
a sick burn, whoever it was.
Yeah. They said, I liked it better as a parking lot.
Quick, cut to that clip of the Imagineering story.
When Imagineer legend John Hench was asked his opinion of the new park, he reportedly said, I preferred the old parking lot.
I can't help but feel like when that Imagineer first saw Paradise Pier, they thought, oh my God, it's just Pleasure Island. Because it looks a lot like it.
But less
Yeah.
cool.
Of course, this was years after Disney actually opened Pleasure Island
Sure,
in Florida. Although that Pleasure Island had a completely different backstory.
It just had the same name and
It had-
basically nothing else. And only a few people turned into donkeys.
And that was their own fault.
There was the whole backstory about Meriwether Pleasure found
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
island.
Which ended up kind of rolling into the Society of Explorers and Adventurers continuing storyline.
Yep.
And speaking of Pinocchio and the theme parks, we should probably talk about Pinocchio's Daring Journey. It's kind of a testament to how much of a flop Pinocchio initially was, that Walt did not build a Pinocchio ride for the initial Fantasyland. It was just Peter Pan and Snow White, and eventually Alice in Wonderland came along, and Mr. Toad, of course. And it wasn't until the new Fantasyland opened in 1983 that they built Pinocchio's Daring Journey, which also opened the same year in Tokyo Disneyland. Chris Nebergall did a really fascinating video about the Fantasyland dark rides and about Pinocchio in particular, about how it was kind of a pastiche of all these rides that had been built decades earlier, and it fits like a glove. Like when I was a kid, until I finally learned that, I think when I finally read Disney A to Z, I never would have guessed that Pinocchio was so much younger than all the others.
As a kid, I had assumed that it had always been there.
It's the same category in your mind. It's like,
right,
oh, it's one of
yeah.
the animated film rides.
And it's a pretty good ride. It rarely has much of a line.
One of the things Chris pointed out in that video was that the original original Fantasyland rides were all focused on adapting not the full story, but just one key element of each movie. You know, Peter Pan was just about the flight sensation.
Right.
Snow White was just about the scary woods. Mr. Toad was just about the madcap motorcar ride. Mm-hmm. And Pinocchio instead did actually try to adapt the whole story.
The Alice in Wonderland dark ride was kind of the whole story, just in a different order.
It was kind of the whole story too, but for the 3 opening day ones, they were just doing a single element. Watching the movie again, there really is no one element to choose because the story is so all over the place and there's no single standout sequence in Pinocchio.
Which you could say the same about Alice in Wonderland. That story was all over the place too. Although later when Roger Rabbit's Cartoon Spin opened, that was kind of back to the basics of just one element because that whole ride just depicts Roger Rabbit running from the weasels.
Yeah.
And then when they did the Little Mermaid dark ride and the Monsters Inc. dark ride, I guess that was back to just in general.
Yeah,
they kind of lost sight of the consistency after a while.
Because the one standout piece of imagery people remember is the nose growing, which is not really an experience you can adapt unless it's like a drop ride where he's lying on his back looking up and the nose is shooting up.
Can we talk about the fact that the nose gave birth to birds?
Yeah, this raises so many questions about the rules of this magic.
There are no rules.
None of us remembered that, right? We were all shocked.
I had to be reminded of that, I think, when I saw Frank and Ollie.
Yeah, I only remembered because it was in Frank and Ollie.
I was not the only one who was like, what the fuck?
I mean, Elsa can create life accidentally too, so that's just a common thing with Disney magic.
She accidentally creates life when she sneezes.
It's interesting. We think of the nose growing, which has been used in so much comedy as kind of a visual reference after that. Like it was in Airplane when Leslie Nielsen's lying to the passengers and his nose keeps growing. Robin Williams used it in a stand-up act. When he improvised that exact thing as the genie in Aladdin, Eric Goldberg convinced him, look, let's just turn him into Pinocchio for that split second. And yet, even in the Disney version, they're still making fun of that. They still find a way to subvert that by having the nest with the eggs who hatch and become birds show up.
So, like, by this point, people who are already familiar with the book Pinocchio, I guess the nose growing was just a memorable sequence for them, even though, again, it's a very small part of the story. The name Pinocchio is still used as slang for a liar, the way Scrooge is used as slang for a stingy person, even though by the end of the story, neither of them are those things.
No.
The closest they come for justification for lies make your nose grow in the movie is the Blue Fairy says, a lie keeps growing and growing until it's as plain as the nose on your face, which sounds like a poorly translated aphorism from another country. Well, in this European country where they don't speak English, here's what they tell kids about lies, and it's like, that does not make any sense.
Okay,
So the moral of the story is you lie a whole bunch and then you can make your own breakfast.
Well, how do you make your breakfast?
Quick sidetrack, an actual example of watching a badly translated foreign film where something like that happened. We were watching this Italian film called Divorce Italian Style. This was before I knew the history or etymology of the word cuckold. So I couldn't get there on my own, but there's a scene where he writes a fake note to himself saying your wife's cheating on you to give him justification in a court of law to murder his wife. But the way it's translated, he draws a picture of a dude with horns and it says, these horns mean your wife is cheating on you.
Okay.
Wow. Because a cuckold was like a horned creature in myth,
Oh,
but it
I didn't even know
also was
that.
slang for someone who's being cheated on. So clearly it was supposed to be like, these are the horns of a cuckold, meaning your wife's stepping out on you. But I'm just
I had
sitting there
no
like,
idea that that's what
what
that
the
meant.
fuck is the internal logic of this? It was years later I pieced this together.
As Mr. Peanut Butter would say, was that an Oscar-winning 2003 Sofia Coppola movie starring Bill Murray? Because that was lost in translation.
Well played.
So anyway, I think there is only one remaining question to be asked, and that is, of course, what's the attraction? So as we discussed before, they had Pleasure Island at Disney World for a while, and they still have Pinocchio's Daring Journey at Disneyland in Anaheim and Tokyo Disneyland, of course. But, you know, Pinocchio is obviously going to be the most watched title on Disney Plus by a wide, wide margin, because everyone's going to start watching these things chronologically and then get through a bunch of shorts and then Snow White and then Pinocchio and then kind of give up. That's how everybody's going to watch Disney Plus, obviously.
It's true.
So Disney's going to feel the need to add a lot more Pinocchio stuff to the parks, kind of like what they did with Seven Dwarfs Mine Train in Disney World, where they closed down one Snow White ride and opened another. So what will be the big Pinocchio e-ticket that they open instead of Pinocchio's Daring Journey? Dave.
In reference to the one scene where Jiminy hides under the music box and gets knocked around by the gears, it's going to be still Pinocchio's Daring Journey, but you're going to be under the car.
Nick.
The new ride will be Whale Flail, the interactive audience experience where they dump everyone in the lake and Geppetto tries to fish him out with a fishing rod really, really fast.
Chandler.
I'm going to go with a somewhat serious answer and say they should do a ride using that Shanghai Pirates of the Caribbean technology with Monstro just chasing you for 5 minutes.
I don't think you understand how this game works.
That would be really cool, though.
Well, unfortunately, you're all wrong. What they are going to do, because I'm a little surprised they didn't do this from day one with Pinocchio's Daring Journey, open it at Epcot's Italy Pavilion.
Yep.
World Showcase needs more rides. I guess at first they thought, well, we don't want to have too many characters at Epcot, but that's gone completely out the window now, because World Showcase alone has the Frozen ride and the Three Caballeros ride, and they're going to open the Ratatouille ride next year. So screw it. Pinocchio ride at Italy, if they don't want to do a direct clone of Pinocchio's Daring Journey, then they should do a ride where you go in and turn into a donkey.
Naturally.
I
And
would
you get
do
shipped
that.
away from the park and you're never seen again.
Absolutely.
I would not do that.
So I mentioned that what's the attraction was our last question, and I'm a filthy liar because we have one more question, and that is Pinocchio, parentheses 1940, close parentheses, a Disney Plus or a Disney Minus? Chandler?
I'm going to give it a Disney Plus. It's way weirder than you remember, but it's still an absolutely beautiful film.
Nick?
I'm giving it a hard Disney Plus. The fact is, this is a classic for a reason, and I don't care how weird this shit is. If you can get through Frozen, you can get through Pinocchio.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Dave?
Look, we have spent the past hour or so nitpicking the weird shit in this movie. We have talked about a lot of crazy, terrifying things in this movie, weird gaps in logic, things that drive us crazy now, things that just confuse us now, things that we can't believe ever made sense to put into a story. So with all that in mind, the fact that this worked on us when we were kids and we never questioned any of it.
Oh,
the fact
absolutely.
that despite all that nitpicking, the movie still works for its intended audience. You have to give that a Disney Plus.
Absolutely. This is a solid Disney Plus. Like you said, it's a classic for a reason. It's weird and it's crazy and it's terrifying at parts, and that's part of its charm. I wouldn't want it any other way. I wouldn't want a more conventional Pinocchio movie because that would just be boring. And I'm worried that's exactly what we're going to get with the Zemeckis remake. We're just going to get a boring ass version of Pinocchio that just looks creepy and doesn't effectively do things to your soul the way this one does.
And not
this
creepy
is
for the right reasons either.
right. This is an affecting movie. I was mentioning how intense the Monstro scene was and how terrifying the Pleasure Island stuff is. The shot of Pinocchio lying face down in the water, that's an intense shot.
Yeah.
It breaks your heart at that moment. This movie is really a primary example of Walt Disney's artistry at its absolute peak. And it shows you, wow, this is how the company that guy created ended up taking over the world, is through products like this, which then enabled them to put out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of completely mediocre products, which are the bread and butter of this podcast most of the time. But Pinocchio is mwah.
Often imitated, never duplicated.
And a nice reminder that even a good movie, you can have fun riffing on it.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, totally.
This is a very good movie and a very riffable movie.
Yeah.
So, do you guys have anything to plug?
By the time that this comes out, I should have my review on Star Trek The Experience out. So go check that out on my YouTube channel, Theme Park Backlot. And you can also follow me on Twitter at ThemeParker104.
Follow me on Twitter, Doggins, Doggans. Watch my stuff on YouTube, youtube.com/Doggins. I'm on Instagram if you want to see pictures, instagram.com/Doggins87. And I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/Doggins, where you can give me money to watch bonus videos and also listen to the podcast I do with my fiance.
As we leave you with a smile and this place.
Treasure Island.